Welcome back. Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast. The draft is over, Raider Nation. How are you feeling? Some of you love it. Some of you hate it. And then most of us in the middle somewhere there, right? You're still processing what happened over the weekend, what the Raiders did. We're going to get into all of that today, not only the draft overall, but the Raiders, of course, specifically around all the picks that they had. They had a lot of picks this year. They had a lot of needs. Did they address them all? We're going to get into that. First of all, make sure you subscribe to the podcast if you don't already do it. Please do it wherever you get your podcast. Shout out to our listeners on the radio in Las Vegas. Yes, we are also on The Bet in Las Vegas, an Odyssey radio station out there as well. So make sure you listen to us there. And hearty hello to everybody on YouTube. Hit the subscription and the notifications bell. And I say us because this show is me and my co-host, Mo Moton. He is the national NFL writer at Bleacher Report, also Raiders columnist at sportsnot.com, where you can find brand new content. We'll talk about that in this last segment of the show, what he's got new, because you definitely want to check that out. And he will also be someone you want to follow on Twitter, at Mo Moton, which you can see on the screen if you're watching us, MoEMoton. I am at LV Gully. Okay, Mo, the draft is over. And it was an eventful one. So many things happened we thought would happen. So many things we thought would happen did not happen. Yes, I had people on Twitter say, oh, thank God you're not a GM. Your show was so wrong. Yes, most of us were wrong. We said that actually for a month leading it, that, hey, we're just guessing. Like everybody else, it doesn't matter how talented you are, what homework you do. The reality is the draft is a very unusual animal. Mo, let's start at the top, though. We're going to get all into the Raiders stuff in a second. But this 2023 NFL draft, a lot of trades. Our producer, David Stepanian, predicted there would be a ton of trades. Let's start there. What surprised you the most about this draft and how it went down?
First of all, so I'll defend our show a little bit here. I don't see how we were terribly wrong on anything. We predicted that Devin Witherspoon would be the pick, and it turns out that the Seattle Seahawks swiped him.
Yes.
So obviously the league was also high on Devin Witherspoon. A lot of people were in Christian Gonzalez, and he went 17 to New England Patriots. So the league wasn't as high on Gonzalez as they were Devin Witherspoon. And also, I'll get into a prediction that I had. I put out my first full-round mock draft, and people saying, oh, no way Jalen Carter gets past the Raiders, Mo. You have him going 9. There's no way they're going to pass on him. And I said, a visit with the Raiders doesn't guarantee that they're going to pick him in that spot. And lo and behold, what happens? Jalen Carter falls to 9, which is where I had him in my first round mock, and I had him going to the Bears, but it turns out the Bears moved back with the Eagles, and the Eagles picked him up. But I had the Raiders passing on Jalen Carter, and I was correct on that. But I will say the surprises that happened during the draft. Who had the Texans trading up for Will Anderson after they drafted C.J. Stroud? Those guys went back-to-back. There was a lot of talk that it was going to be one or the other. Nick Caserio shrugged his shoulders and said, why not both? And that shocked me as I was doing my Bleacher Report live show. Will Levis in the second round was a shocker because he was reportedly telling his friends and family, according to our Reddit thread, that the Panthers were considering him with the first pick, and his odds changed in his favor after that came out. So that was a shocker there. But as far as the Raiders are concerned, I thought they would address the cornerback position, the linebacker spot earlier, but I'm sure we'll get into that today.
We will get into that. And I think that that's one of the things when you look at the draft, and to your point, we said it. And yes, we were in close vicinity to what the Raiders were going to do. We predicted going in, it was going to be very heavily defensive. We probably would have seen the Raiders go defense with their second round pick too, but we'll get into that later. It's just too good of a value to pass up there with Michael Mayer, and we'll get into it. But for me, I think that's the thing here too, is remember, you just don't know. Mo, the thrilling thing about draft day is the unpredictable. You talked about it, how aggressive Houston was. When they pick second, they take C.J. Stroud, and then all of a sudden you see the trade roll up with the Cardinals, and it's the Texans again for back-to-back picks at the top of the first round, Will Anderson. You're like, holy moly, this is nuts. And sure enough, we saw this trading go, and the Raiders were participants in that trade. Maybe not at the top of the first round, but they did a lot of swapping later on, which we'll talk about. But that, to me, it just goes to show you with this draft, you just don't know what's going to happen. And so when you're going into it, everything you think might happen, players that you think the Raiders might grab at 7, no doubt, that can change very quickly as these GMs, as these scouts see who falls off the board.
You have to go along with the flow of the draft because you just don't know who's going to be available at what spot. So you can't say we're definitely going to draft a cornerback here or a linebacker there, because there may be a player who slips that you didn't think would be there. And that's what I believe happened with the Raiders in the second round with Michael Mayer. Who thought he was going to be the third tight end off the board?
No one.
I saw a lot of people have him in the first round as the first or maybe the second tight end after Dalton Kincaid. Turns out he was the third, and he looked pretty pissed off when Dalton Kincaid was picked to go to the Bills. They showed a shot of Michael Mayer, and he's like, I should be the tight end. I should be the top tight end in this class. So to get a pissed off Michael Mayer on the Raiders, I'll take that. The other thing about the Raiders draft is, and you mentioned it, the aggressiveness of teams moving up for their players. The Raiders moved up, I believe, 4 times for players. And I said this on Twitter that 3 of the times that they moved up, I actually liked the pick.
Mm-hmm.
And that another prediction we had right on this show is, or at least I said this, I said the Raiders weren't going to make 12 selections. They're going to make 9 to 10. They come away with 9 because a lot of people were saying, well, these picks are useless. These day 3 picks are useless. Well, the Raiders use those day 3 picks to get guys like Michael Mayer, to get Chris Smith, to get Jacorian Bennett. So there's no useless draft pick. And the Raiders knew that they had to kind of consolidate their class because there's no way you're going to have 12 rookies come into camp. You bundle those picks up, as I said on this show plenty of times, and you move up for the guys you want, and that's what Dave Ziegler did.
So if we look at this, Mo, let's start to break it down a little bit. We'll get into specific players as we roll into segment 2. But if you look at the draft recap for the Raiders here and what they did through all 7 rounds, the question is, did they address all their needs? The Raiders had clear opportunities to add depth on the offensive line, defensive line, at cornerback. And then, of course, they were looking, perhaps we had heard, to add some depth to the quarterback room. When you look at it from the needs they had heading in, where did they hit? Where did they miss?
They definitely hit on the defensive line. They picked up 2 defensive tackles in Byron Young in the 3rd round at pick 70 and Nesta J. Silvera as their last pick out of Arizona State, who, by the way, has a connection to Antonio Pierce, who was the co-defensive coordinator at Arizona State. So that pick makes sense. Of course, their first pick, Tyree Wilson, is going to be a versatile defensive lineman, not just going to line up on the edge. I think he'll also kick inside in some packages. So they definitely hit in the trenches on the defensive side of the ball. Where they missed at was, as mentioned briefly, the linebacker position. They waited until the 6th round to draft a linebacker in Amari Burney out of Florida. Now, I think he has an opportunity to compete for a lot of snaps early as a rookie. But to rely on a 6th rounder to patch up your linebacker corps after what it looked like after free agency, that's risky business. And I know a lot of people will say, well, Patrick Graham's defense de-emphasizes the position of the linebacker. And I say, look, you want good football players on every level of your defense, whether they're high value or not. And I think the Raiders, where they picked Byron Young and where they picked Trey Tucker, who I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot today, I think that spot should have been a linebacker or a cornerback. Now, they did get Jacorian Bennett as a cornerback, but I felt like they should have double-dipped that cornerback, and Jacorian Bennett should have been the second cornerback they took. They passed on the top prospects at the position, which makes me believe that they're going to bring in a veteran quarterback. So cornerback, linebacker, I question a little bit. You mentioned offensive line. I thought they would get a guard, but maybe the board didn't fall that way. Other than that, I think they addressed pretty much their needs there because I think they got a safety in the 5th round who's probably going to play a lot of reps as a rookie, in Chris Smith.
Yeah, and I think that's where you look at this, and we'll get into grades and whatnot later. But I look at it as a solid draft class, and there are a few areas where they missed the mark. You just mentioned them. I think offensive line sticks out, but to your point, as the board falls, they did address offensive line with a good kid we'll talk about as an undrafted free agent in just a minute. But if you look at what they've done there, and at cornerback, yes. Could they have gone earlier in cornerback? Yes. If Michael Mayer wasn't there, I think they probably would have. But who knows? I think the situation with this class, and this is how this is going to be kind of, I think, my script until we see how this unfolds over the course of the 2023 season, Mo, is that this class is a good class, but it is not a class that is going to help them, I believe, significantly right away. There is not, to me, 4 bona fide guys on the defense, for example, who are going to make such an impact to turn this team around. I think this class will get better as time goes on. You have some good kids here who, with some playing time, will be rotational players. You mentioned Young and some of these other guys. They will work their way in. I don't think they were bad picks, but it's not going to be instant gratification. Would you agree with me on that?
I would agree with you on that, but I also want to correct myself on the show before the draft. And I remember you asked, what would a good Raider draft class look like? And I talked about starters. And I want to correct myself on that because in the NFL, you can be a quote-unquote starter and play less than 50% of the snaps.
True.
You could be a backup and play more than 50% of the snaps. So I want to step back from the label of starter backup and talk about how many snaps do you think that player is going to play? Is that player going to play more than 50% of the snaps or less than 50% of the snaps? Because the more you're on the field, obviously, the more chance you can have an impact on this football team. And if I'm looking at this draft class, I think Tyree Wilson is going to play most of the snaps on the defensive line. I think eventually he'll take over for Chandler Jones. Whether it happens early or not, I think it depends on the recovery, the healing of his foot.
Yeah.
Byron Young is going to be a rotational player. I don't see him playing more than even 40% of the snaps because that defensive line room, and Ziegler talked about it, buckle up. It's going to be a very competitive defensive line room, and I don't see Byron Young playing a ton of snaps because he's going to have to compete with Bilal Nichols, who played about 71% of the snaps last year, Matthew Butler, Neil Farrell, who they drafted last year. As I said, they brought in Nesta J. Severa also as a defensive tackle.
Yes.
You got Jerry Tillery is still there. So there are some bodies they have on the defensive line, and Byron Young's going to be in that shuffle. The other two players I would look at is Jacorian Bennett. I think he has a chance to start. I wouldn't pen him in as a starter, but I think he has a good chance because of his ball production. I think Chris Smith is going to be a starter, quote unquote, guy who plays a lot of snaps, more than 50%, simply because I'm not a big believer in Marcus Epps, and I really didn't. I don't want to say I didn't like the pickup, but I was very lukewarm in that pickup. I think Chris Smith can come in immediately and play a lot of snaps at that position as a rookie because of his instincts, because of his football IQ and ball production. He has the total package. He just didn't test well at the combine. I said this in a tweet that if he ran a 4.4, Chris Smith would have been probably a third-round pick.
Yes. And listen, I don't disagree with you on that. I think Chris Smith will play a lot of snaps, and I think I like the Jacorian Bennett pick. I think he might be that gem of a pick, right? He might be that guy, just like Max Crosby in the fourth, Jacorian Bennett in the fourth. Again, though, I think that there's ifs there. And even with Tyree Wilson, which I love the pick, trust me, the injury, we just don't know how long it's going to take him to get there. To your point, he'll eventually replace Chandler Jones. I have no doubt about that. I think he has the talent, and there shouldn't be, as long as he gets healthy and it all goes the way it should, then that should take some time. And that's why I think this draft class, you're going to have to wait. It's not going to be like, man, after 4 weeks, look at how these guys are lighting up the board here. No, I think it's going to take some time. You develop some of these guys in, and we're going to get into the specifics on all of these guys when we come back. But certainly, I think Raider Nation has to feel good about the fact that there wasn't major reaches, although you could say Byron Young, a lot of people had him in the fourth round. But they liked him. They liked what he did, so they took him there. This was not a Gruden-Mayock reach type pick, nor was Michael Mayer or Tyree Wilson. Those were not guys that had no business being where they were, except for Mayer. He should have been higher. So to me, if you're looking at it through that lens, it's improvement and it's steady, and you're starting to see a little bit, I think, Mo, of where Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels are in how they want to construct this team by the type of player they are selecting.
Right, and I think Dave Ziegler said this previously, that they're not going to fix the defense with one draft. It's going to take multiple draft classes to do that. Now, of course, you want guys who are going to make an immediate impact, but I went through the list of names, and Tyree Wilson is the only guy right now that I could say definitely should make an immediate impact. I feel good about Jacorian Bennett and Chris Smith, but we'll see. And as I said, Byron Young, crowded defensive line room, so that's another wait and see approach. I think he'll be a rotational player, immediately contribute on run downs or early downs against the run. That's fine, but as you said, I question the value there. I'm sure we'll get into that later on in the show.
Yes, and of course they have Michael Mayer, who will be a starter from get-go, I believe.
Scott's favorite draft pick, by the way.
Absolutely. Sometimes it works out that way, right? But literally, the kid is a catching machine. I mean, he does not drop balls. If you get the ball to him, he's not as dynamic as some of the other tight ends when it comes to running the field, but they call him Baby Gronk for a reason. I think there is a lot of similarities there, so it'll be exciting to do that. Okay, when we come back from the break, we're going to get down into all the draft picks for the Raiders and give you our assessment of them, talk a little bit about them. And then in the third segment, we'll get nitty gritty, give you our grade. You kind of got a sense for how we already feel about this one. And I know for you out there who hate it and wanted CJ Stroud and thought they should give up everything, including the deed to the stadium to get him, I know you're going to tell us that we're shilling for the Raiders and all that jazz. But no, we're just being objective. And hey, if you don't like it, you don't like it, but we're going to give it to you straight here on Silver and Black today. Don't go anywhere. We are coming right back. Welcome back. Silver and Black today, the post-draft edition. Yes, a release on a Monday morning for you on your way into work. We appreciate you guys being with us. If you don't already subscribe to the podcast, please do it wherever you get it. Just look us up. We are an Odyssey original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. You can also hear us on the Bet in Las Vegas and on our YouTube channel where you can subscribe and hit the notifications bell to watch the show. Yes. Mo Moton, he is national NFL writer at Bleacher Report. I'm Scott Gulbransen, your host. We are here and we are going to get nitty gritty. Okay, Mo, we look at this and I'm going to flash the list up here for the Raiders. If you look at the entire draft class, of course, Tyree Wilson, Michael Mayer, Byron Young, the first 3 rounds. Trey Tucker, still on that one. I'm still trying to warm to that one. Jacorian Bennett, we talked about last segment. The quarterback, yes, everybody wanted a young quarterback, Mo. They got one. Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue. Okay, we'll get to that. Chris Smith, the second from Georgia, the safety. Amari Burney, the linebacker, took him to the 6th round to get a linebacker in Las Vegas. And Nesta Jade Silvera, of course, forks up. Arizona State defensive tackle there as well. So, Mo, we look at this list, and of course, we have to start with the number 1 pick, and that, of course, is Tyree Wilson. No questioning this guy's ability and what he's able to do. His wingspan, he playing on the other side eventually and being the guy on the other side of Max Crosby is a dream situation from the end. I think people were disappointed. You talked about Jalen Carter. Everybody wanted to draft in the middle for the Raiders. We talked about the need there, no question about it. But when you have the opportunity to get an edge player like Tyree Wilson, foot injury or not, that's a hard thing to pass up in the draft.
Here's the thing. I'll start here because I know the Jalen Carter thing is going to come up. And I said this during the Bleacher Report Live and because I experienced it. A lot of Raider fans weren't happy with this pick primarily because they wanted Jalen Carter, not because they thought Tyree Wilson was a horrible pick. It's because they preferred someone else. And I will say, if you listen to what Dave Ziegler said at the end of the draft, he said, we grade players with 2 separate grades, 2 separate aspects, the on-the-field production and the character and I want to say off-the-field stuff. So there are 2 separate grades. So based on what Ziegler said, 2 separate grades. What you do on the field, Jalen Carter is an A there. Now, the off-the-field stuff is what makes me believe why they passed on him. Mm-hmm. And you don't have those same questions with Tyree Wilson. Now you have the injury question, but Tyree Wilson did say that he'll be ready for training camp. So until I hear otherwise, we take his word for it, right? And if the Raiders did their due diligence on Jalen Carter's off the field matters, I'm sure they did their due diligence on Tyree Wilson's foot. Now I will say, I heard that other GMs were concerned about Tyree Wilson's foot injury and how it was healing because he had a screw put in there, and they feared that he may have to have another surgery. I'm going to repeat that, Raider fans. So if you're squinting, I'm just saying I heard that GMs were worried about Tyree Wilson's foot because they are fearing that he may have to have another surgery in the near future. I'm not reporting this. This is just what's out there and why he may have been available to the Raiders. Because a lot of mock drafts had Tyree Wilson going earlier than 7, and there was talk that he can go 2 or 3 over Will Anderson. Yeah. So I think part of the reason there is because of the injury scare and not knowing the unknown. You want to take a gamble with a top 5 pick, a guy coming off of a foot injury.
Well, and I actually thought he might go to Seattle. I really did, because Seattle has no pass rush. They have no pass rush, and instead they go cornerback. And I know that's what we talked about, the Raiders going cornerback because of the need there. But in reality, I think one of the discussions I heard during the draft was, well, yes, the Raiders need cornerbacks. But I'll tell you what, if you have a really good pass rush, that's going to help out a cornerback, even if it's a veteran who's a fill-in gap until you figure it out there. So there, I think a lot of Raider fans lost sight of that because Christian Gonzalez was still there. Some of these guys we talked a lot about, and the entire world in the NFL talked about, these top-end cornerbacks were still there, but the Raiders instead go to the edge. The big risk with the injury, that is the only thing that is the negative in my mind. But the Raiders, again, they made the choice. They had their doctors look at it. Whoever they consult on those situations, like you said, some teams had the opposite. Whoever the Raiders are talking to, whoever they trust, have told them that the risk was worth it. So you have to trust that and see where it goes. But again, I think improving that edge with what you have in the middle, they drafted 2 guys in the middle last year that they like. Yes, they didn't perform as much as they needed to last year, but they clearly like who they have, and so they're going to build around them. By the way, if you can have both edges on fire, you can also help the middle of your defense too, right?
Right. But the other thing I want to point out is the other reason I can't give this pick an A and I gave this pick a B plus, not just because of the foot injury, but Tyree Wilson is not a fast starter off the line of scrimmage. He doesn't have a quick first step. You hear a lot about these edge rushers having a quick first step off the line of scrimmage. He doesn't have that. But I will say he's learning from one of the guys who had one of the quickest first steps in his prime in Chandler Jones. That's what Chandler Jones is known for, having a quick step and timing his jump off the line of scrimmage after the snap. So if he's going to learn to improve in that area, Chandler Jones is the perfect guy to do it with.
And the Raiders, of course, we heard the news before the draft. They've restructured Chandler Jones' contract. We talked about that here on the show last week. And I think Chandler Jones understands where he's at in his career. Will he have a better year this year? You hope so. But I think him being there to tutor Tyree Wilson, to be there to teach him how to get that first step a little faster is a big deal.
Can I address one thing too? The whole calling him Cleveland Farrell 2.0. Can we stop that? Just look at the film.
Yeah.
Tyree Wilson is a more athletic defender than Cleveland Farrell, and he's more versatile. Cleveland Farrell had to kind of move inside because he wasn't getting enough pass rush on the outside, so they said maybe he can take advantage of slower offensive linemen on the inside. Tyree Wilson comes into the league being able to move inside. You know, that's one of his calling cards, is that he's able to play in multiple spots along the defensive line. So he can take advantage of some of the offensive linemen based on what he can do with his pass rush. Now, he needs to develop a secondary counter to his pass rushing skills, but most of these edge rushers do coming out of college because they're not finished products.
Right.
But I think Tyree Wilson's upside is way higher than Cleveland Farrell. And by the way, Tyree Wilson consistently, as I said, mocked in the top 5. Cleveland Farrell was a back-end first-round pick, so the comparisons don't meet.
No, it's if you're comparing those two picks, then you clearly did not read a thing about either one of these players or understand who they were or watch them. Exactly. So yeah, let's just there's going to be negative people. It doesn't matter. Again, you could pick the second coming of Bo Jackson and they'd still decry the pick. So whatever it goes, you just have to deal with that. Now, Mo, we move into the second round. Michael Mayer, right? So my Notre Dame allegiances aside, this kid, I mean, the Raiders are there, and I think you like this because, listen, the best player available stuff, right? We talked about that a lot during our pre-draft coverage. But Michael Mayer slips down the draft. He goes third out of the tight ends when he was projected in most people's book to be the number 1 overall tight end. And you're sitting there. You just traded Darren Waller. You don't have a future. You have a bunch of tight ends on 1-year deals. You don't have your future at the position. You get to your pick in the second round and he's still there. They had to be salivating over this pick, especially you talk about the perfect system fit with Josh McDaniels' system and Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback if he stays healthy. This is the guy. The fact that they were able, this is an A++ pick. If Tyree Wilson was a B+ because of everything else we talked about, Michael Mayer was a drop-dead great pick. I saw Raider Nation absolutely love this one, and they should.
Yeah, this is the best pick in the draft for the Raiders. They traded up for it, addressed a sneaky need. Now, people didn't have tight end at the top of the needs priority list, but as you said, you have a bunch of guys who aren't the long-term answer. They signed Austin Hooper, but he's going to be making less than $3 million. So he wasn't the long-term answer there. So the Raiders definitely addressed the need, not their biggest need on defense, but a need nonetheless with a player who, as you said, a lot of people has the first tight end off the board. Now he's behind Dalton Kincaid, behind Sam Laporta. When I did a Bleacher Report mock draft for the Raiders and I picked a tight end in the third round, people lost their you-know-what. And to have Michael Mayer there in the second round, the Raiders could not resist. We know how important the tight end is to Josh McDaniels' offensive system, so it makes sense that they went up and got him. And I think they're going to get a player who can give you, 700 to 800 receiving yards right out of the box. Now, it's hard for tight ends to transition in the NFL, but eventually Michael Mayer could be that guy to be that secondary weapon behind Devontae Adams in the passing game.
Absolutely. And not only that, but you look at what they're able to do with him, and the fact, if you didn't watch him play in college as I did every game, you'll see his hands. I mean, the guy is unbelievable. He's not the same kind of player as Darren Waller, different type of player, but he is a guy, if you watch If you go back, and I know it pains Raider fans to hear this, if you watch some of the New England offense under Josh McDaniels and how it ran with Gronkowski, you can't compare those two guys. One guy's a Hall of Famer. This is a college kid just coming into the NFL. But nonetheless, that's the kind of player that you put into that system who does really well once he's developed and at a level where he can play fully. He's good to go there. And I love the pick, and I think that you're right. Raider fans didn't want to hear about a tight end in this draft, and I don't think they would have taken one in the second round had he not been available.
Right. And the other thing I want to bring up is Jimmy Garoppolo loves to throw to the middle of the field.
Yes.
Every year that Jimmy Garoppolo played most of his games with the San Francisco 49ers, George Kittle had an all-pro or a Pro Bowl year. So getting a Michael Mayer in that offense, immediately it helps Jimmy Garoppolo. He's going to have his numbers up. If he can stay healthy, he's going to be productive with that tight end. And just to have that long-term rapport, I think Jimmy Garoppolo, for as long as he's the starter of the Raiders, he's going to have a strong connection with Michael Mayer. And the other thing I want to bring up about Michael Mayer is that he's not the most refined blocker, but he plays with a physical nature. And I think being physical is the beginning of it, but he has the willingness to block. And I think he'll be a fine blocker with time because, again, these are not finished products. With coaching, I think he'll be a complete tight end. He's probably the most complete tight end of the group coming in. And this is a deep tight end class, but Michael Mayer was definitely the top of the list for me.
Yeah, if he can learn how to block and learn pretty quickly, like his first season, he has a runway you wouldn't believe. So we'll see how that goes. Then we get to the third round, Mo, and the Raiders go defense. They go interior this time, and they go with Byron Young out of Alabama. I think it was a surprise. Again, most of the mocks, most of the experts had him going at the highest, at the low, at the very end of the third round, but more in the fourth round. The Raiders did technically, in my view, here reach. But is that reach worth it? They believe so. I don't think it's an egregious reach, but they saw something from this kid that they felt like at that point in the third round that they needed to select him. I scratched my head. They're both third round picks, actually. We'll get to Trey Tucker in a second. But when you look at this pick from Alabama, he is going to be a rotational player. I think this is a kind of guy who can maybe in year 2 start to pick up some more if he develops. But it's going to be a tough road to hoe for him. I think he's going to have to learn a lot. He's going to have to develop significantly for him to break into that center of the Raiders defense and really have impact.
Here's my thing about the Byron Young pick. I feel like if the Raiders wanted Byron Young, they could have got him at the early of the fourth round, because typically defensive tackles who don't show much of a pass rush for most of their collegiate careers are usually middle round picks. Now, if he had the pass rushing production of a Kalijah Kancey, I think then you can justify him being that early. Now, he did have 28 pressures in his last year at Alabama because he played behind some guys at Alabama, didn't get a lot of playing time. So maybe it's just a product of him not being on the field. But he had 28 pressures this past season. He had 28 in his first 2-3 years, I believe. So he matched that pass rushing production. So there is some upside there. Maybe he develops as a pass rusher. But from his collegiate resume, you look at that player and you say, that's a fourth round player because of the lack of the pass rush in his earlier years. Now we'll see what he'll be, but as I said the earlier part of the show, he's going to be competing with a lot of guys for snaps. Bilal Nichols, Jerry Tillery. They brought in Nesta J. Silvera, Matthew Butler, Neil Farrell Jr. from the last year's draft class. So he's going to be competing with a lot of guys. To take a player that's probably going to play 30% of the snaps in the third round at 70 when you have a big need at linebacker and cornerback, that was the problem for me. I don't have a problem with the prospects. I think he'll immediately contribute to rundowns, but I think there were better options for the Raiders on the board at 70.
Yeah, I don't understand it because you're right. The slew of linebackers still available at that point.
Deion Henley was still on the board.
He was still there.
Trenton Simpson.
Exactly. Both of them still there, and I'm thinking, why? I understand it's a point of need, but you can't build it, as you said earlier, and the Raiders said, you can't build the defense in one draft. But you could spread out the development. You could get, you got your edge guy. You can get now a linebacker because you have none. The linebacker, I mean, you tweeted it out. What did you say? That it's like a horror show, or it's freakishly scary how bad they are.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. That's what you said. At linebacker. So to me, but for whatever reason, they went with Byron Young. They like something about him. And you're right. He did not rush the passer in college. So we'll see what they do there. But yeah, that was a head scratcher. But then, go ahead. You have something else to say about
one quick
Young?
thing about Byron Young that may have pushed him up the board, and this comes from what I heard from Dave Ziegler, and I talked about it with Jalen Carter. They value character. Not to say that it's top of the list, but character goes into their evaluation process. And Nick Saban praised Byron Young as a leader. So I think if anything, that probably bumped Byron Young up the board.
Could be. And then we look at the other third round pick, and we're not going to talk about Jacorian Bennett, but we're going to close out this because we talked a lot about him already, and a pick Mo and I both really like. But the other third round pick, a guy I saw a lot of actually in Cincinnati, playing for the University of Cincinnati, was Trey Tucker. And I know the reaction from Raider Nation with this pick was like, a wide receiver? Now, again, this is a small guy, a lot of speed. You and Evan Grote from Just Pod Baby were texting me about some of the reaction out there. Raider Nation, you gotta chill a little bit. This is not the second coming of Tyreek Hill. He's just not.
Oh
He's
my
fast.
gosh.
He's fast. No, I've seen people, he's like a Tyreek Hill. No. This is a developmental project, okay? Yes, punt returns. The Raiders need a punt returner. Hunter Renfrow should not return punts. Kickoff return, yes, although he didn't do a lot in college. He's basically a slot receiver, so that tells you again about Hunter Renfrow. But you look at this kid, and it's almost like an Al Davis pick from the later years where it's just like his blinding speed blinded Dave Ziegler, so they took him in the third round. I still don't, and nothing against the kid. I hope he makes the team. I hope he's great. But I still can't, all these days later, Mo, I still can't understand this pick.
I want to say this and emphasize because these kids are having the time of their life this weekend. Going to the NFL, it's one of their best moments in their life, so I'm not going to crush the kid. But if you wanted a good kick punt returner, you can get that in the fifth round. You don't pick that player in the third round. When you have big needs, I'm going to say this one more time. You got big needs at linebacker and cornerback, even off the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line, and you get a guy who's basically going to be a special teamer, not an immediate impact player. And he's your fourth best slot receiver on the roster right now. You have Jacoby Myers, you have Hunter Renfrow, you have DeAndre Carter, now you have Trey Tucker. So he's your fourth best slot receiver, and you draft him with the 100th pick in the draft. Now, I will say this pick makes me think that Hunter Renfrow is going to be on the move. I'm not saying that they specifically drafted Trey Tucker to replace Hunter Renfrow, but what I'm saying is the accumulation of the slot receivers on the Raiders roster right now, and I ran through the names, Jacoby Myers, Hunter Renfrow, DeAndre Carter, and now Trey Tucker, makes me believe that they're going to move their most expensive slot receiver and bump up Jacoby Myers, who plays primarily out of the slot, DeAndre Carter, who can move on the outside, but he played primarily out of the slot last year with the Chargers. And guess where Trey Tucker lined up primarily at Cincinnati? In the slot. The writing is on the wall. I think that's the biggest takeaway from this Trey Tucker pick. Not that, he's not going to contribute. It's that Hunter Renfrow could possibly be on the move. Now, I will say really quick that the Raiders can save over $11 million if they wait until after June 1st to move Hunter Renfrow. I believe it's about a little over $7 million if they trade him early. We'll see what happens, but I think the writing is on the wall for Hunter Renfrow. A lot of people have asked me about this. I think there's a 75% chance that he is traded if they find a great suitor. Now, I had an idea, really quick. I had an idea.
What? An idea?
I had an idea. If they're out on Hunter Renfrow, and they're gonna indeed trade Hunter Renfrow, I call the Ravens and say Hunter Renfrow for Patrick Queen. Let's make the deal. The Raiders can clear a log jam at the slot receiver position and address the need at the linebacker spot.
Yes, this is like month 2 of the Patrick Queen campaign from Mo.
Yes, it is.
You love that guy? I can't argue with it though. Like, I mean, I would love to make fun of you. Like, no, but I can't because if you could get him, absolutely. I mean, look, who you got there? You got some ghosts. You have nobody at linebacker. I mean, you got to do something.
It just makes so much sense. The Ravens acquired Roquan Smith from the Bears last year and signed him to a 5-year, $100 million extension.
Right.
They just drafted Trenton Simpson, who the Raiders should have drafted, by the way. They have Trenton Simpson right now, so that tells you that they don't plan on keeping Patrick Queen long term. They got a rookie in the early rounds, and they got a guy they just paid. So it makes sense for you to at least place the call and make the inquiry that, hey, we're interested. What would it take to get him on our roster? Because, as you said, who is the surefire lock player that's going to play most of the snaps at linebacker in the Raiders defense? Robert Spillane, Divine Diablo, Amari Burney. Like, I like Amari Burney, but to depend on a 6th-round pick to be a guy to lead your linebacker room, it's a stretch. Get a starting player there, fix your defense with that, and I think Patrick Queen would be an immediate upgrade.
Absolutely. And listen, again, back to Tucker. Just the last thing I'll say, I want to defend him a little bit because he had no quarterback in Cincinnati last year. So when you look at his numbers, there was nobody there to throw to him because Ritter had left the year before. And so there was nobody to throw the ball in Cincinnati. So Trey Tucker didn't have it. But again, round 3 right there, Mo, still linebackers available. There were still cornerbacks available. You might have gotten 2 starting cornerbacks and then getting Bennett even in the 4th too. You could have had 2 starting cornerbacks and instead you got another slot receiver. I think that's where the confusion and the difficulty for me to understand is still there.
The one quick thing I'll say about Trey Tucker, because I don't want to crush him continuously on the show, because he's got enough of that on Twitter.
Not his problem where he was drafted.
Right. It's not his fault. The Raiders drafted him. He didn't draft himself. But I will say that the speed that the Raiders have been looking for, Trey Tucker provides that. So if he's able to get on the field and play some offensive snaps at wide receiver, he'll definitely give you the speed that you want at that position, because the Raiders have been trying to find it. They signed Philip Dorsett, who's a former Patriot. Now he's up there in age, but in his heyday, he was known as a speed wide receiver. Now he's up there in age right now, so I'm not depending on Philip Dorsett to make the roster per se. But if you can get Trey Tucker on that roster, he's going to give you the speed. He's going to give you those gadget plays that you may want out of a Josh McDaniels offense.
Absolutely. All right. That's going to close out segment 2 for Mo and I. When we come back, we're going to close out. We'll go through some of the other later round picks for the Raiders, and then we'll give you our overall grade for we got to give you a grade. Everybody, what's your grade? What's your grade? I'll give it to you. I won't give you my college GPA, but I will give you the grades for the Raiders draft. You're listening to Silver and Black today. He is Mo. I am Scott. We will be back right after these words. We are back. It is the home stretch here on Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. That's right. How did you like the draft? Tell us on social media. You kind of already have. But anyway, I did the picks, Mo. I did the first round pick, the Tyree Wilson pick. Overwhelmingly, the poll we put up on Twitter, 85% Raider Nation who responded to the poll liked the pick. Not surprising when you get a baller like that up front. Hopefully his foot will be okay. We'll get to that. By the way, make sure you follow Mo on Twitter, MoeMoton. I am at LV Gully. Mo, I know you got a bunch of new pieces out on this Monday. Let everybody know what to read today.
Back up on Sports Night after a small break from the platform, but for those asking, I am still the Raiders columnist at Sports Night. I'll be breaking down, I broke down each day of the Raiders draft. You heard it here, what we thought of Tyree Wilson, what we thought of the day 2 picks. But check out what I thought about the day 3 picks, because I thought that was more positive than negative. Well, I have more positive praise than criticisms there. Now I do have a couple. I do have a one major quip with their day 3 selections, but overall, I think they did a good job, and I like Dave Ziegler being aggressive on day 3 because you have 12 picks. Why not bundle some picks together and get your guys that you targeted?
Yeah, I liked how he moved around and traded when he needed to trade to get the guy he wants. Didn't always agree with him. But at the same time, look, they had a plan going. Everybody, what's the plan? What's the plan? They clearly had one. And unlike the Gruden Mayock years where you were just like trying to connect the dots, it was like the end of Usual Suspects and you're seeing the board. You couldn't figure it out. This made more sense. Even if I didn't agree with all the picks, it made sense. And I think that was a huge deal. If I'm part of Raider Nation, I'm a fan, at least I can see it, connect the dots and like, okay, these guys actually put some time and effort in and they know what they're doing. They're not reacting on emotion and just picking guys because they like them. They're actually doing it with a plan in place, which is good. All right, Mo, we look at the rest of these picks and we get to round 4. We'll start with the quarterback. All these fans, Mo, Raider Nation, for years, we got to get a young quarterback. We got to get a young quarterback. Well, they got Jimmy Garoppolo right now, but they did get a young quarterback. Okay. It wasn't the guys everybody wanted, but Aiden O'Connell, the quarterback from Purdue, clearly this is a guy who will be the number 3 quarterback, most likely, in the Raiders quarterback room. What is it about this kid that fits Josh McDaniels' MO? What is it about this kid that Raider fans can like?
One, he has a quick release, so he's going to get the ball out very quickly. So that means he's very decisive. The other thing is he can read the field. Even sometimes he didn't read the entire field at Purdue, but he played in what was called a pro style offense, which means he does have to read coverages and make some checks there. So that's a positive. That means he can intake information. One of the things that Dave Ziegler said at the end of his draft press conference was, there's one thing that we don't see about these quarterbacks that you don't see on film or when watching them on TV is the neck up. And I think that was important when you look at that selection. Is the Raiders probably got in a room with him and felt like, okay, this kid can take a lot of information. He's great from the neck up, along with the tools he has, and he does have an arm. Maybe not the most accurate throwing downfield, but he does have an arm, and I'm sure they think he's a very high IQ player. So when you have a high IQ backup quarterback, that guy can come in and be a spot starter. So Jimmy G goes down in the second quarter. Who can you depend on to step in right away if you don't want to depend on 37-year-old Brian Hoyer? Aiden O'Connell get in there and manage the game. And I think that's what his job is going to be initially, because he does sometimes force some throws. So you want to rein that in. But if you can rein that in, you can turn him into a game manager for at least the first year. He makes a lot of the good decisions. As I said, accurate and decisive. And I think the high IQ thing really mattered to Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, and that's why he was the selection in the fourth round.
Yeah, and I like it too because there's zero pressure for this kid to do anything but learn this next entire year. He'll run that practice squad team, right? Or if he's not active. So he'll be able to learn what we've been told a million times is the most complex offense and terminology there is in the NFL. So he's going to have all that time. He's going to learn from the old man, Brian Hoyer, that's there, who's been running it. Jimmy Garoppolo obviously knows it well too and has run it. So he's going to be in the perfect situation. Zero pressure. Nothing is expected of him. And yeah, if he ends up coming in as a spot starter, or at least a spot, I shouldn't say not a spot starter, but a spot player, if Garoppolo goes down and Hoyer has to take over, or if he progresses really well and he can get in there, all good for the Raiders. And especially in the fourth round. I mean, listen, the Raiders, depending on what happens with this season, this is a rebuild. We thought, hey, it could be a year. It looks more now the way they drafted. It could be a couple years until they start to really hit on it and the plan that they want to do. So you might actually have the opportunity to draft another young quarterback next year earlier in the draft.
But this is also why I said that the Raiders are more likely to draft a C.J. Stroud than an Anthony Richardson, or draft a late round quarterback than to get, a Hendon Hooker. Right. I feel like Josh McDaniels still likes that pure pocket passing quarterback. And that's why Anthony Richardson never made sense to me. I think he wants a quarterback that's going to run the play that he calls and not deviate too much from the structure of his system. I mentioned this plenty of times, and this is why I said I may like Anthony Richardson in a certain spot, but I don't think that's a fit for Josh McDaniels and what he wants for his offense. Aiden O'Connell, I think, is perfect for what he wants in a quarterback. But I will say my one criticism is the league has changed. And nowadays you need a quarterback that can move, and Aiden O'Connell has no mobility. So he better have a quick release, because if he's at the mercy of that offensive line and guys are bearing down his neck, he's not going to be able to move out of the way or evade pressure. He's going to just have to throw the ball away or check it down.
Yeah, his big downside for sure there. All right, we look then to Chris Smith, the safety out of Georgia. We talked a little bit about him earlier, Mo, but the thing with this kid that I like, he's good in press coverage, good hands, good in run defense as well. His tackling concerns me a little bit, not the best, but also not terrible. And the Raiders, we know, have had issues with that. He's okay in the zone as well. There's some spots here that I think they can develop, but I think he's going to get thrown in there and just see what he can do. Why not? I don't think he is any worse, even as a kid right out of college, than some of what the Raiders have had back there over the last 3 years.
This is just my untrained eye, but I actually like him better in zone coverage than man.
Do you?
Because he doesn't have that long speed. So he ran a 4.6 or 4.62 something, or even a 4.7 at his pro day. So he doesn't have that speed that's going to carry down the field. So you don't want him against athletic wide receivers, because he could get burned that way. The way, to me, in my opinion, the way you use Chris Smith is you put him in center field and allow him to read the quarterback and the wide receiver. I think that's where he works best because of his IQ and his instincts. He can read a play before it happens. He has that anticipation. So if you put him in center field as a free safety, as a deep safety, that's where you get the ball production. That's where you get the interceptions. That's where you get the pass breakups from. And I think being a very instinctful player at his position makes up for the lack of athleticism and speed that he has. And that's why I think he dropped to the fifth round, because he doesn't have those eye-popping testing numbers. But Dave Ziegler did talk about Chris Smith being a very smart player, being very instinctive, and being able to locate the football. And that's why I think he gets on the field very early, even as a 5th-round pick.
Very good to the ball. Absolutely. Great encapsulation, I think, of the strengths there. Okay, then we get to the final 2 picks for the Raiders. Amari Burney, the linebacker out of Florida. Look, you get to the 6th round, they finally get a linebacker, not one that you and I would sit there and say, hey, this is a guy you get later in the draft. I did not... full disclosure, did not know a lot about him until the Raiders picked him. I didn't go that deep, apparently. And so when you look at that pick, that's not going to be the guy to jump in there and be a solution at linebacker right now. Is this a guy you see making this roster even in the 6th round? Does he have a strong upside that you can tell right now that fans can get excited about?
He has a type of background where he can contribute immediately on special teams. He's a former safety, actually transitioned to linebacker early in his career at Florida, made some waves, had a big play against Utah at the beginning of last season. He does have some coverage qualities. There was some talk about, is he good in coverage? Is he not? I saw some discrepancies within Raiders Twitter. I'll break it down for you. He's not a man cover guy. And Dave Ziegler did mention this during his presser. He said, we don't ask linebackers in the NFL to cover man on man against tight ends and running backs nowadays. And I'm paraphrasing here, but I think it's simply because running backs and tight ends have become so athletic and so good in the pass catching game that linebackers just can't keep up. You got to match a safety with one of those guys. So he's not going to be asked to cover man on man. He's going to be asked to cover in zone and closed spaces, and he can do that. And that's where his ball production came from at Florida in his last season. So I think he'll be a special teamer with the upside of playing some significant snaps at linebacker because the Raiders just don't have a lot of talent at the position. So I said this, that of the Raiders draft class, of the 9 guys, Amari Burney has a chance to be the biggest surprise because the pathway for him to see a lot of plays at linebacker is there because Divine Diablo, Robert Spillane, the names there aren't big names, aren't notable names. So anyone who's at the back end of this draft class or UDFA or someone they pick up later in free agency has a chance to play a lot because the Raiders don't have a lot at the position. So Amari Burney definitely has a chance to contribute right away.
All right, there you go. Everything you want to know about Amari Burney. And, of course, read Mo's column up on SportsNot today on Monday, and I'm sure you will see that as well. I have a guess. Is that a pretty accurate guess? You're going to talk about him?
Yes, and I know I seem pretty excited about Amari Burney, and it's because, and not just because Raiders don't have a lot of talent there, but I just feel like there's always one year where you look at one guy and it's like, how did the 7th-round pick slide and he's contributing early? How did the 6th-round pick slide? How did this UDFA slide? If you're looking at one guy who could surprise you, as I said, it's Amari Burney because the pathway for him to play a lot is there on the weak side of that linebacker position.
And Mo, I know we're running out of time here on this show today. We talked a little bit about Nesta Jade Silvera at Arizona State, the connection there too as well. I want to jump in before we leave to some of the undrafted free agents. I think there was one or a couple actually significant signings the Raiders made that I really like. One is Dalton Wagner, the offensive tackle out of Arkansas. So they didn't address tackle in the draft. They didn't address offensive line in the draft, but they go out and get this kid. I still don't know how this kid wasn't drafted. I like him. He's got such a strong upside. And I think for a guy to come into the Raiders, offer some depth, and eventually perhaps even make his way. This is my bet to eventually make his way into being a starter.
Yeah, he definitely has a chance. The Raiders, I think, are still looking for that swing tackle. Don't tell me about Brandon Parker. Don't want to hear it. But I think Wagner has a chance. He's got that power in his hands. He was the 6th ranked in his recruiting class among offensive linemen in 2017. So definitely had some talent coming out. We'll see what happens there. But if you're looking at an offensive lineman who could potentially make some waves or at least make the back end of the roster, he's one of the names you should look at.
Azizi Hearn, of course, they signed defensive back out of UCLA. They also signed Brock Martin, outside linebacker / edge, really another undrafted guy. Another linebacker, Drake Thomas from NC State. I'm just going through the list here because there were so many of them. And Adam Plant, of course, a UNLV product, so they keep him home in Las Vegas. These guys are all going to have a chance to get into camp and do something interesting. They also signed tight end John Samuel Shanker out of Auburn, and another Perryman, this time Washington cornerback Jordan Perryman. So the undrafted free agents to me, Mo, are always really interesting because you just don't know. A lot of these guys get into camp and they start turning heads. They're always a long shot to make the roster, most of them. but there's always maybe 2 or 3, sometimes even 4 that end up shaking it enough that they either make it onto the active roster and they play special teams, or they get onto the practice squad and there's somebody you can develop.
Yeah, unless I missed it. Clinton Curtis, also another Chattanooga product who's talked about a lot. That Raiders fans really like, that could possibly add some beef on the interior of the offensive line. So definitely some names to watch among the UDFAs. We won't know really what happens with those guys until we get to training camp, when they put the pads on, as they say. OTAs is kind of working out in your shorts and your t-shirt. I know there are going to be reports about this guy looks good, but I really don't pay attention to that stuff until it gets to training camp, when the banging really happens.
Exactly. Yeah. You start to like their stories, and then fans like their stories,
right?
And because they're always great stories, and then you start to root for them, and then they don't make the team, and people get upset about it. But you can guarantee 1 or 2 at least will make that. Sometimes there's even more, especially with this young roster on defense. Hey, it's gonna be an open competition, so you just never know what's going to happen. But overall, Mo, I look at this Raiders draft, and because of a couple of the sneaky good late picks, including the 4th round, 6th round, and then of course the Michael Mayer pick and the Tyree Wilson pick, I give them a solid B+ on this draft. B to B+, not good enough to be an A in my book because of some of the misses on linebacker and obviously cornerback. I think they could have done a better job. But overall, I think Raider Nation should be happy with this as a progression, as a step towards this team getting more competitive and getting into a position where they can build a roster from the ground up to become a contender in the AFC West.
You're a little higher than me, but before I give my grade, I will say I know we mentioned him earlier, but I want to say Jacorian Bennett in that 4th round. That was the other pick that I really liked. I felt like he was overshadowed by Deonte Banks, who went earlier,
right?
I believe, to the Giants. But he was the other cornerback at Maryland. That, again, Jacorian Bennett has the ball protection to play right away. Don't overlook him. Don't underestimate him. Follow him on Twitter, by the way. He's a pretty good follow. He has an inspiring story that you might want to check out. But
absolutely,
my overall grade for this class is a solid B. And we talked about some of the things that I criticize. I feel like Josh McDaniels needs to upgrade his idea of a modern day quarterback. I would prefer a quarterback who can move. It kind of fits his system to a T, but you got to change. You have to evolve with the game.
You do.
And I think you have to have a mobile quarterback. That's why you saw Tanner McKee go in the 6th round. Guy can't move. We talked about the Trey Tucker pick. That is a head scratcher. No matter how you try to sell it to me, that pick will always be a reach. And I just feel like they could have done better with the Byron Young pick at number 70. To my opinion, should have went with a cornerback or a linebacker there. But the picks that they made, Michael Mayer, Tyree Wilson on the first day, the Chris Smith, Jacorian Bennett picks, more than made up for it. I give it a solid B. I would have went B+ again if the quarterback position was a little more updated, but I think B is a fair grade.
Well, there you have it. That's what we think. And I listen, the Tyree Wilson thing too just makes me a little nervous. That's all.
Yeah,
if there anything goes south with the injury, then we're going to come back and we're going to regrade, because then we'd be in a much different position. As much as I like Michael Mayer and some of the later picks, I just think that you have to be careful with that. But I like the pick overall. I like the kid. Right. He is a dog. He is exactly what you need on the other side of Max Crosby. They could be just a powerful tandem for years to come. So we'll have to see on that. But the draft is over. Now we start to get into this period of roster adjustment. We'll see what's going on with the Raiders before we get to OTAs and camps, which again, OTAs aren't very exciting, but nonetheless, we're going to get into the summer slowdown here in a little bit. One thing I will say, make sure you follow the show on Twitter, SNB Today. Also, Mo on Twitter, MOEMOTON. Also read his stuff up on Bleacher Report and Sportsnaut. You can follow me at LV Gully. I will also get back to writing here this week. By the way, just a little note, Mo and I, we've been going nonstop since July on the show, so we are going to take the rest of the week off. Yes.
Oh, no.
Yes, imagine that. Now, Mo, we're still working and got other things going, but from this show, we're just going to give you a little break. We'll be back next week with a full slate, but we're going to take a little bit of time, digest what's going on here, and we'll come back with some good guests. Of course, we like during the summer bringing on guests, former players, get some good stories. We've got to get some Al Davis stories. We haven't had any Al Davis stories lately, right? We've got to get some of those.
We haven't, but I'll say the most Al Davis pick in this draft was, I want to bring him up again, was Jacorian Bennett.
Yeah,
ran a 4.3, fast
absolutely.
as lightning, has that long speed to keep up wide receivers downfield. He would have loved Ja'Cory Bennett.
He would. And I love that kid. I'm telling you, with the top of the draft, sans Trey Tucker thing, we'll see. But those picks in the first 4 rounds, if they hit on all of those, it's going to be a really good draft for this team because that kid is good. And I was excited when they selected him. So we'll see how it all runs down. But make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get it. Make sure you follow us all on Twitter, and we will interact with you. But and make sure, Mo, you got any live stuff coming up? Or are you done for a little while too at Bleacher Report?
I have one more Raiders live show on Tuesday, 12 noon Eastern,
So
9
tomorrow.
Pacific.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice.
So I'll be again going over the Raiders draft class, just going more in depth on each pick. So if you like this show or if our breakdown of the picks, you'll love my Bleacher Report live show. Again, 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Also, I'll have another Sports Not Pizza at the end of the week. You won't be hearing or seeing us here on YouTube because we're off. But if you want to get your fix, you want to get your Raider fix on draft from draft day, I'll have a column up on Sports Night at the end of the week.
There you go. See, we don't completely abandon you. We're still there for you. It's just different formats. You'll be all good with it. All right, Mo. Take care, man. We will see you next week.
All right, sounds good.
All right, guys, everybody. We appreciate you being with us as always. Thank you for subscribing to the show wherever you get your podcast. Just search Silver and Black today. Hit subscribe. Hit auto download. That helps us out significantly. Great chat again by the folks on YouTube. So thanks for being with us as well. And say goodbye to our friends listening on The Bet in Las Vegas on the radio. We appreciate you being with us. For our producer, David Stepanian, for my co-host, Mo Moton, I am Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black Today. Have a great week, Raider Nation.